everyone. I'm Nairy, your host with the Avanti Woman, and welcome to our podcast. The Avanti Woman is a platform dedicated and designed to empower, connect, and build women to move forward, feel confident, and thrive in four areas: healthcare, finance, entrepreneurship, and philanthropy. Today, we will be discussing and focusing in the area of entrepreneurship, and I'm super excited to have my good friend and colleague, Sara Citak, an amazing woman, mother, entrepreneur, business owner, banker. Oh my God, it goes on. And she will be leading today's discussion. Well, no wonder they call her a phenomenal woman. Look at her. She does it all and with so much ease and grace.
Thank you.
Of course, Sara. So just recently, Sara and I were chatting, and we thought that business formation is, one of the fundamentals to any business foundation. We wondered, does every entrepreneur really know how important it is, but at the same time, how easily a business could be formed? Well, Sara has a great discussion in store for all of us, and I know I'm excited and cannot wait to hear all about it. Sara, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Nadia. I really appreciate the kind words. I'd like to welcome our listeners to our first podcast in a four-part series to discuss the legal aspect of your business. I know from my experience, along with my friends, we have all had a dream of owning our own business, which is exciting. However, there's always various aspects that we need to establish to protect our business and ourselves. Our focus today, the first of a four-part series, is to discuss business structure, which includes the type of structure, naming your entity, registering your business, and knowing what to expect or keep in mind while your business is growing. Today, we have with us a very special guest, Durdana Karim from Encore Law Group, located in Los Angeles, California, who specializes in corporate transactions and business law. I'd like to welcome our guest and expert, Durdana Karim. Durdana, it is so good to have you with us here today. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us to become aware of the benefits and potential pitfalls when establishing and growing your business. Durdana, can you share a little about yourself and why you entered into the field of law?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Nairy and Sara, for giving me the opportunity to come and discuss a little bit. So my name is Durdana Karim. I am an attorney working at Encore Law Group. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, but I was actually born in a country called Bangladesh. So coming from a family of immigrants and being an immigrant myself, education was very important to me. I earned my undergraduate degree at UCLA and then took a few years off and decided to go to law school. When I started law school, I actually wanted to do public interest law, but I really loved a lot of the corporate law classes we had at Loyola. I took, business law, mergers and acquisitions, securities law. So I really enjoyed that and got a corporate law concentration. And so right now I've been working about over 2 years as an attorney at Encore Law Group, which, as you had explained, Sara, that specializes in corporate transaction and business litigation. And so, being a woman of color, my passion has always been to support communities of color and marginalized communities. So I really love the fact that the type of work that I'm doing right now, it does support women-owned and minority-owned businesses. And, living in Los Angeles, there's so much innovative opportunities for these businesses. So it's amazing to be able to be part of that.
That's wonderful, Durdana. I'm so happy that you joined our podcast today. You really are a wonderful example of a female who achieves her dream and wants to help other women achieve theirs as well. Durdana, can you share with us what type of law you specialize in specifically and how you help your clients?
course. So I specialize in business and corporate transaction, and this includes providing legal services for early stage startups and entrepreneurs to more mature companies. So we provide legal advice and services for clients from basic entity structure and formation to helping them get investment raises, to doing mergers and acquisition, intellectual property rights, making sure that their business is compliant with all of the California employment laws. And so our clients come from a number of industries, including technology, real estate, healthcare, restaurant, retail, and professional services.
That's great. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I know when I first started my own business, I was not familiar with all the legalese. And I don't even know, is that really a word, legalese? So, Durdana, why don't we begin our discussion with the basics? What is an entity and what is a business structure? I actually thought they were one of the same. So help us out.
Yes, of course. So an entity is basically when you have a separate legal structure, separate from what you're doing as a business owner to the actual business you're providing. So that's usually creating some type of a company, like an LLC or limited liability company, which we'll go into a little bit more discussion, or corporation. A business structure is the type of entity that you have formed. And so there are generally 4 different types of business structures. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I know we're going to talk about liabilities more during this podcast and the series that we have planned. But before we do that, let's start from the next question that I had when I started my own business, which is, how do I determine the type of structure that I should have, and what are they? So, what are those? How do I determine it?
That's a good question. I have the same.
Yeah, of course. So before I do begin, I do just want to let you know that this is just a discussion. It's not a legal advice. So we always recommend everyone to speak with an attorney at the specific state. I am a California licensed attorney, so I can kind of only speak about California laws and, local regulations in the state. So we always recommend everyone to speak with an attorney practicing in their state, especially if they're doing business in that specific state.
Thank you for that reminder, Durdana.
Of course. So the type of business that you choose, it really depends. And this is why speaking with an attorney is important, just to get that advice. But it really depends on, one, the type of business you're doing, what type of service you're providing, what type of product you're selling, because certain products and services are heavily regulated. And so you want to make sure that you have the permits and licenses, the type of industry that you're in, the tax consideration, also your current future goals, and whether you want to actually get any type of investment funding from another individual, or you want to get a business loan.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about that later on as well, the future about podcasts about business loans and equity and things of that nature. But let's start out. Can you give us an example of, how those come into play? Maybe you can share a little about that with us.
Sure. So let's say, for an example, you are trying to do an online e-commerce business, and you do not currently have any plans to hire employees. It's just you yourself. You don't want to really get any type of outside funding, or maybe you might get just a small SBA loan. For this type of business, we usually recommend forming either an S corporation or an LLC. This prevents from C corporations really are there's a double taxation, and S corporation or LLC is a pass-through form of taxation. So individuals are basically, the profits and losses of that business are passed through to the individual taxes. And so you're saving on taxes there. LLCs are also very flexible. If you do in the future want to have employees and you want to issue equity or interest for the employees to incentivize the employees to work there, you're able to do that without having to amend something called the articles, which is filed with the Secretary of State when you form a company. So there, you can also change the distribution structure. Certain types of, I think, businesses also, let's say you're getting appreciating assets. This includes real estate property, intellectual property, they're usually also held in an LLC. A lot of entertainers will typically form S corporation as a loan-out corporation. That's usually something we do in the entertainment industry.
Okay. That's great. Thank you for that. So maybe let's discuss the four types. You mentioned that there's four different types of structure, and thank you for the reminder that each state has its own specific laws, and to speak to their attorney in that state. But can you highlight for us and for the owner, what does an owner need to know, highlighting the four different types of structure that's available?
Sure. So the four types of different business structures are a sole proprietor, general partnership, a limited liability company, and a corporation. A sole proprietor basically occurs anytime you do business without formally forming an entity, and that's when you're practicing as a sole proprietor. And this type of business, of course, is less expensive. There's no initial fees when you're forming it, but it really does open the individual up to a lot of personal liability because there's no separation of a business entity and the individual who's the owner or providing the services in that business. And really, this is it's basically just an individual doing business with a DBA, and we'll go into what a DBA is. So this usually happens, we'll see this when a client has been providing a service or selling a product to a customer, and they don't understand that when they're doing that, they can be personally liable if anything happens to the business or a client is dissatisfied with the service or product.
Okay.
And then the next type of business structure is a partnership or a general partnership. This happens anytime you're doing a business with two or more people and you're sharing profits and losses of that business. So that at that point, you're acting as a partnership. This is also creating a lot of liability for people who are in that partnership because there is something that happens in legal terms called joint and several liability when you're in a partnership, which means that you're liable. One partner can be liable for the acts of another partner.
Okay. Well, that's that's good to know about partnership. So you really have to choose the right partner and understand what that really means. When we talk about joint and several how do you say that again? I am sorry.
Joint and several liability.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Basically, it means that you can either be liable, one partner can be liable, or all the partners can be liable for only the acts of one partner. So it really does create just a huge liability. And generally, nowadays, you don't see general partnerships.
That's very like a rare. Serious marriage.
Yes. Yes. Or, you'll see it when people are actually doing business together, but they haven't formed something and they didn't know they were, practicing right. As a general partnership. That's where we've seen it. And so a lot of states have actually now created different ways to limit liabilities if you still want to be in a partnership. And that's one of them is a limited partnership. This is where it's a partnership where you have one general partner, and that general partner is actually a company. So you'll form a limited liability company or an LLC or a corporation, and that acts as the manager of that partnership. It has all of the managerial rights. And then you have limited partners who are, they have less liability. They won't be liable for the acts of any of the partners. And you get that benefit. The whole benefit of a partnership is the pass-through taxation. And we also have something called a limited liability partnership. This is a partnership in which all partners have limited liabilities for the debts and obligations of the limited liability partnership. But everyone also has decision-making or managerial rights in that partnership. Usually we see this in most types of professional groups like attorneys, accountants, architects, and engineers. And they're usually practicing in the same profession.
So would any other type of profession use an LLP, or is it really, and does it differ state by state?
I would say it differs state by state. The one reason you see in California most of these professional groups practicing as LLPs is because California does not allow these professional groups to do business under an LLC. They either have to be a professional corporation or they can be a limited liability partnership. And that's the reason why you see a lot of attorneys, law firms as LLPs or accountants as LLPs in a partnership, because they do want that pass-through taxation, very similar to the LLC, but they don't want the liability of a general partnership.
Okay. So now you mentioned LLC. Tell us a little about the LLCs.
Sure. So the LLC is a business structure that's formally, so the other two that I was discussing before, the sole proprietor and the limited liability partnerships and the general partnerships, you don't usually have to register with the Secretary of State. There are some limited exceptions in California for a limited partnership and limited liability partnership. You do have to register. And in California, you do have to obviously register for an LLC. This creates a whole separate legal entity from the individual owners. The benefit of an LLC is you get a pass-through taxation. It's a great flexible structure, and there are no restriction in terms of the ownership compared to some other types of business entities. Any individual can be the owner. You can have another corporation be the owner of the LLC. You can have another LLC or a foreign entity. And though in California, I will say there are also some restrictions. Certain insurance companies, and again, people practicing in licensed professions cannot practice as an LLC.
I see. Okay. So you said insurance, which is near and dear to Nairy's heart and my heart.
Yes.
I think maybe Nairy, do you have, you want to ask that question, or shall I ask that question?
My question, Durdana, is when you said insurance, so what type of insurance companies cannot be a part of, did you say S?
Specific, like insurance companies in terms of, I believe it's business insurance, not business, but insurance companies more when you're providing overall reaching insurance rather than just an individual doing the service themselves, they're selling.
So if you have an insurance agency, let's say I own an agency and I provide services for, life insurance or Medicare, I can have an S corporation, correct?
Yes.
So
corporations you're able to do that with insurance companies. And if you're providing this, because you're not providing the specific insurance, you're selling.
I got you. So you're talking about you're talking about the main corporation. For instance, let's say, I don't want to name names, but okay, I got it.
So Nairy, this is good. Check. Yeah, everything is in order.
Yes. I know. I was having a heart attack. I'm like, did I do the wrong thing? No, I did not. Thank you for clarifying that.
It's very similar to like a bank. The bank, most banks and trusts, they can't form LLCs, but they're able to do corporations. But if you're providing a certain type of, financial services, there may be a way that you can do an LLC. And that's why it's very important to speak with an attorney, because they can kind of specifically advise. Not every, type of business or service you do is the same, regulation. So they're able to navigate the laws, the local, state, and federal laws, and make sure that, the type of entity you're practicing in is proper, or doing business in is correct.
Wow, great information.
Yeah. So Durdana, let's talk about the one that, I know how I'm formed, and probably Nairy really quickly, because I have a whole bunch of other questions for you. But tell us really quickly about the C Corp, which we probably don't see a lot of, and then the S Corp. And then I've got a whole bunch of other wonderful questions for you.
Of course. So C corporations are, again, it's another entity in which the owners, and the difference between a C corporation and an LLC, both of them you're filing articles with the Secretary of State in the state that you're forming the business in. But a C corporation, the taxation is separate from the corporate level and who the owners are, the shareholders. And so profits of a corporation is taxed at the corporate level whenever it's earned. And then whenever the corporation will do a distribution or a dividend, the shareholders are taxed. And so you get that double taxation structure. And corporations aren't unfortunately able to deduct any taxes from whenever they make distribution to shareholders, and shareholders aren't able to deduct any losses from the corporations whenever they receive a distribution. And so we see corporations mostly in publicly traded companies, companies that are maybe getting large VC financing because they get that benefit of having several different levels of stock or classes of stock. You can have preferred stock, common stock, voting, non-voting, and so you kind of there's a beneficial aspect in having that, making sure the founders can have control of the business compared to investors who invest in that business.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And, it's important to know as our business is growing, and so how does, what should we consider? What should a business consider, or when should they consider changing their structure? Is there any point where they should say, hey, here's time for me to go back to my lawyer and talk about my business structure?
And sure, so anytime you can change a business structure, and before I actually go into that discussion, if I can quickly discuss also the last type of business entity, S corporation. I think we forgot to mention that an S corporation is very similar to a regular corporation, but the IRS has established these companies to be able to, especially for small businesses, they don't want that double taxation. An S corporation has been established by the IRS to allow certain small businesses to have a pass-through taxation, so they don't get the corporate level taxation, and still get that benefit of being a corporation. Though there are certain limitations, you can only be a domestic corporation, you can only have certain types of shareholders, 100 shareholders, and again, you can't be certain types of financial institution like banks or certain insurance companies. And so that's the difference between S corporation, C corporation. But yes, Sarah, you can certainly change a business structure. Let's say you formed an LLC to a C corporation, you can convert it. However, we as attorneys, when we are advising our clients about the type of entity that they should form, the different structure, we take into consideration, again, their current goals, their future goals, whether they're going to have employees, what type of tax they can benefit from. And so we want to make sure that when we form a company for a client, that's the company that's going to be, the type of structure that they're going to use for a long term, and only convert if it's necessary.
Okay, wonderful. I want to go back, Durdana, to something you mentioned when we first started the podcast about DBAs. What is it, and does every business need it, or when does a business need it?
Sure. So generally, whenever we try to form a business, we do a name search. So in California, your business, when especially you're forming it with the Secretary of State, it cannot be the same name as any other business that has already formed. So we have to do a name search. Sometimes what happens is that you may want to use a name that hasn't been registered, or you've registered with the Secretary of State, but you want to do a business as something else because that's the brand you want to put out. You might have a restaurant in one city and you have a restaurant in another city, and you want to use that name specific to each city. So that's when you have to file something called a DBA, doing business as, or a fictitious business name filing with the local county register that the business is located at. And so a DBA is it's a filing that you do with the local county register. It is very technical, so we again recommend either speaking with an attorney or using a third party kind of agency that handles DBAs, since you do have to get a notarization, do that filing, and there's also certain publication requirements for the DBA.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So is the DBA also protected under the structure?
The DBA is protected so long as it is fully registered with the local county registrar's office, and it meets the publication requirements. In Los Angeles, I believe you have to publish it with the local newspaper for about 4 weeks, which as an individual and you're a business owner, you're going to have to go and try to find a local newspaper, do that DBA publication. So we always recommend just having a third-party agency handle it or attorney handle it, and then it's effective for 5 years, and then you'll have to renew it. And then it also, again, the 5-year requirement is in Los Angeles specifically. There may be other requirements in other local counties.
Okay, thank you. And so thanks for the explanation. So now we know that there's the 4 different structures that we can talk to our attorney, or our attorney will advise us on that. And we've talked about DBA. Now I want to transition a little about liability, which is something that every business owner thinks about, is liability. What is the impact? Can you help us understand the foundation? I'm sorry, I pause there for just a second, but what does it mean to protect your personal assets? So how do you separate it from your business, and how do you protect it?
Sure. So when I was when I had explained about sole proprietor and partnership, how that exposes you to personal liability because you haven't formed a separate entity. You're doing business either with another individual or several other individuals or yourself, and you haven't created any type of other separate legal structure. You're exposing yourself to the personal liability for the debts and obligation of that business. So if the business ever gets sued, the individual, a third party, can come after your personal assets. If you own a home, if you have a bank account, if you have whatever it may be, certain assets that you may have, they can go after your personal assets. And that is one reason why we always say, if you're going to do a business, especially in a heavily regulated industry, and in California, you may be required to form a separate legal, an LLC or a corporation. When you do form an LLC or corporation, you're limiting the liability of your personal assets with that of the business obligation and debts. And so because of that distinct separate legal entity that you have, one thing I would say though is when you're doing that, as you had explained, how do you make sure you protect your business from yourself? You do have to make sure that you separate your business activities with activities of yourself. So all of the assets should not be personal assets, and the business assets shouldn't be commingled. There should always be a separate bank account with the business, and it shouldn't also be commingled with another business that you may have. You should always keep accurate accounting and records. Certain corporations require annual minutes, and so it's very important that you keep that, because courts in California have, and in other states as well, seen when businesses aren't doing that and they're commingling, personal activities and assets of the individual owner with that of the business. They've been able to say, hey, you're not doing business properly. We can go after, your personal assets at that point.
Yeah. Well, it's really important for us to make sure we have professionals that we can reach out to discuss all these aspects. Thank you very much for that advice. But I know we're going to be discussing banking in a future podcast, but is there something else that you recommend for clients to purchase or do while they're starting out, those easy kind of low-hanging fruit things to protect ourselves in addition to a business structure?
Sure. So outside of, let's say you are in a business that requires business permits or licenses, outside of that, we usually recommend getting a general liability insurance for the business. This includes, protecting the actual owners, who are the members or shareholders, the officers, directors, managers, and agents of that business. If you're a business in California that's practicing professional services like a doctor or an attorney, you may actually be required to get malpractice insurance, and then it's always also good to have malpractice insurance. And in California, because California is so employee friendly, a lot of the laws that are passed here are very employee friendly. We always recommend to get an employment practice liability insurance. California and some other states also require businesses to have workers' compensation insurance if they have employees. Another thing we would recommend also, because if we're in the discussion of employment law, if you are in California and you do have employees in California, it's really important to speak with an attorney just to make sure that you're in compliance with all of the local and state laws. Making sure you have good employee handbooks, all of the employee documents. You're making sure that your business is in compliance with state and federal wage and hour meal break laws that are here. California also had recently updated their worker classification or modified their worker classification in terms of, if you classify your worker as an employee or independent contractor. And so it's very important that you do speak with an attorney if you do have employees, just to make sure you're in compliant, because from our business litigation side, we always deal with businesses who were not in compliant when they come to us. And then, they have to deal with the other side when they're getting sued. So from the corporate side, we want to make sure that you're in compliant from the beginning and you don't have to deal with that later on.
I remember hearing all about it with the independent contractors versus employee classification. So thank you for that reminder. I want to switch gears a little bit and about registering one's business. So what does registering mean? When I first heard it, I was like, what do you mean registering my business? And when and why do I need to do that?
Sure. So when you want to at least practice and you want that limitation of liability under the LLC structure or the corporation structure, you file something called articles, either articles of incorporation or articles of organization for the LLC with the Secretary of State, with the local Secretary of State, and that's formally creating your business at that point. At that point, you also obtain something called a tax ID or an EIN, which is used to open up a separate corporate business account. And so at that point, that's when you're registering your business.
Okay, that's one. Thank you for that. And then should an individual do this on their own, or what do you recommend?
Yes, so anyone can really actually go online to do this. It is something that you're able to go on to, at least in California, you're able to go on and file the articles, obtain the EIN. But we again recommend speaking with an attorney, one, to see which type of entity that you should form, to make sure you're in compliance with all of the California rules and regulation. And some of these forms, when you do the EIN, you're going to an IRS website and it's very technical. So we want to, as attorneys, we do this all the time. We know what information to provide or ask our clients. So we want to make sure that if you are doing it, or if someone is doing, forming a business, that they do speak with an attorney, just so that they don't get a rejection or they don't have to amend it or make a mistake when they're doing that.
And, I'm always, Durdana, I don't know about the rest of some of your clients, but I know myself, let's say I'm registered, then I'm always wondering, are there any updates? Do I need to do anything else? Is this it? I'm always thinking about what's the next step that I need to do.
Of course, right. So usually there are certain annual things that a business needs to do. This includes filing an annual statement of information for California businesses. If you're a corporation, I believe LLCs are biannual. In Delaware, you actually have to file and pay a franchise tax for LLCs and corporation. So there are certain annual things or biannual things that a business may need to do. Also, just, of course, filing annual taxes, and then making sure for corporations keeping annual minutes, which are helpful in terms of making sure that you're separating, again, that business activity with your personal activity.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. So now we formed our business and we're legally set. We've got our structure, we've got our entity, we've got our DBA if needed, we've registered. Now I'm growing my business. So is there anything we need to consider when our business grows?
Yeah. So I love this aspect of it when the business is growing. Initially, young, business owner, female business owner may come to us and they're just starting. And once they start growing, we would love for them to come back to us because there are so many other things to ensure that your business is successful, at least in the legal aspect of it. And this includes trademarking, making sure your intellectual property is protected. All of that really helps with the overall brand of the business, because we've also seen it where business has been running for 20 years and now they want to trademark their name because some other individual is trademarking, and so at that point you might not be able to trademark your name or the type of trademark you specifically want to do. So we always recommend coming back to an attorney or speaking with someone to see what else you can protect in your business, including your intellectual property and your brand.
Okay, that's great.
Can I ask a question, Sara?
Oh, of course.
What's an advantage of trademarking?
Sure. So trademarking really protects your intellectual property right. So when I'm talking about intellectual property, this includes also patents, copyrights, all of that. But let's say you're practicing as and like for the M&M brand, I'm just giving an example.
Yeah.
If M&Ms had not been trademarked for, so many years, that brand is so recognizable with a certain company, right? With a certain business. Another individual starts using it. If you don't have a registered trademark with the United States and Trademark and Patent Office, you do have certain common law rights. But the advantage of trademarking is getting that federal registration. And so again, speak with an attorney because we can explain it a little bit better. But there are certain advantages because, when you think about a business that has been running for a long time, they want to make sure that they protect their brand. So that is one way that you protect your brand. That is one way you make sure that you are having your intellectual property rights protected is through trademarking.
So to a certain level, you inhibit the competition to a certain level, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Because when let's say another business is using your name or a slogan or something that you have trademarked, because trademarking can also be word or it could be images, we can send, a lot of attorneys do send a cease and desist letter because, they're taking away your clients, or clients are getting confused to say, hey, is this, this brand or this name belongs to this business or does it belong to another business? So the way you protect your brand, the way you protect your intellectual property is through that trademarking. And then of course, doing the certain requirements in terms of sending a cease and desist letter if that ever happens, if there's ever an infringement.
So good to know. Thank you.
Nairy, that was a very good question. And it's actually going to be one of our topics in our future podcast in our 4-part series. So
wait a second, 4-part series, Sara?
A 4-part series. Yeah.
So tell us, what do you have in store for us next? What do you have lined up?
Well, we have some wonderful topics lined up. But before we go into that, Nairy, I just want to first thank Durdana for sharing with us her experience and wisdom. I wish, I'll be honest, I wish I knew all of this before I started. And I know you gave us a lot to consider. So thank you, Durdana and the Encore Law Group. And a big thank you to all of our listeners. This was just the first in a 4-part series. And we look forward to having, our listeners join us for our second podcast, where we'll be discussing trademarks, licensing, and what I consider a very important topic to all of us ladies, the benefits of registering as a women-owned business.
Ooh, I love it. I mean, I have to say I was quiet most of the time because this is so much information. And I have to say, Durdana, I have a new level of respect for attorneys. Seriously. You guys, I mean, this is so much information and such valuable information. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your expertise with our audience. Sara, thank you so much. You prepared such an amazing discussion. And I think all the women out there, female entrepreneurs, this is truly valuable. And, it's a good way that could lead them to start their businesses, their endeavors on the right path. And ladies, we heard how important it is to have an advisor, an attorney. And if you don't have one, Encore Law Group, make sure you reach out to them. And thank you so much for our listeners. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a wonderful, blessed day. Remember, follow us at the Avanti Woman on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or you can visit us www.theavantiwoman.com. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you soon.